Guys, welcome to another video. You've got Mr. Everything English, and today we are going over everything that you need for unseen poetry. Unseen poetry, guys, is the middle child of English literature. Just like the middle child, unseen poetry is forgotten. Some teachers don't even teach unseen poetry. Some students don't even know that there's something called unseen poetry coming up in their exam. But fear not, because you have this video and I will give you everything that you need for your unseen poetry questions. Now, the unseen poetry, guys, section in your exam, you are looking to spend a total of 45 minutes in this section. You are looking to divide this time as follows. 5 minutes is spent planning your questions, and then our exam divides in two. Guys, then our exam divides in two. After we spend 5 minutes planning both questions, we have two unseen poetry questions to complete. Over here, we have the 24 marker, and over here, we have the 8 mark unseen poetry question. This is the exam, guys. Two questions, you have 45 minutes for the whole section, you spend 5 minutes planning. Now, how do you divide that time? You spend 30 minutes doing the write-up for the 24 marker, and you spend 10 minutes doing the write-up for the 8 marker. For the 30-minute question, guys, we are looking to write 3 pretzel paragraphs. And for this paragraph over here, we are looking to write 1 paragraph. I'll explain the structure in a second. And that is the timings for the unseen poetry question, guys. 45 minutes for the entire section, 5 minutes planning, 30 minutes writing over here, 10 minutes writing over here, 30, add 10, add 5 is 45 minutes. Now, for the 24 mark question, what are you marked on? You are marked on AO1. Now, what is AO1? AO1 looks essentially at the quality of your point and if you're answering the question, and it looks at your reference. And what is AO2, guys? AO2 looks at if you're able to explain the effect of what? The effect of language, the effect of structure. Now, when it comes to poetry, there are certain structural devices that I would like you all to talk about. Which ones do I mean? For poetry, guys, when it comes to structural devices, I would like you all to speak about Volta. I would like you all to speak about Caesura. 3 structural devices that I would like you all to speak about. When it comes to language devices, that's pretty generic. Similes, metaphors, personification, these are generic language devices. But when it comes to structural devices, in your essay, in your 3 paragraphs, I would like you to speak about at least one of these. Now, what are they? Guys, volta is the shift in the poem. Every poem has a volta. Every poem has a turning point. So when the poem goes from being happy, happy, happy to sad, this is known as the volta. Now, caesura. What is caesura, guys? Caesura is when there is punctuation. I'm going to make a note and say throughout, and not in the middle. Guys, caesura is when there's punctuation throughout the line, but not at the end. It could be in the middle, it could be in the beginning, but it's not at the end. So imagine there's a line of poetry. If there's nothing at the end, so no comma, no full stop, no question mark, no exclamation mark, but there's a punctuation throughout, maybe in the middle, this is known as a caesura. Now, what is enjambment? Enjambment is when the line of poetry has no punctuation at the end. It's when the line of poetry carries on. There's nothing at the end that stops it. So that is language for AO2. We must talk about language devices. We must talk about structural devices. The third thing, guys, that you must all speak about is form. Now, what is form when it comes to poetry? These are the forms of poetry that I care about. We care about a narrative poem. We care about an epic poem. We care about a dramatic monologue. We care about something called a sonnet, guys, and lastly, we care about something called a free verse poem. So, in your exam, look at the poem that they've given you. That poem will be one of these 5. A narrative poem is a poem that tells a story. An epic poem is a poem that is about an event. This could be a wedding, this could be a death, this could be a war. A dramatic monologue is a poem where you have one speaker in the first person speaking the whole way through. Normally it is a very biased poem. A sonnet is a 14-line poem that is traditionally about love, but this doesn't have to be romantic love. It could be loving yourself, it could be loving the world, it could be loving houses. And finally, guys, a free verse poem is a poem that tends to not follow any particular rule or structure. Stanzas are all different lengths and so on. Now, that is this side. That is AO1 and AO2, which means that in our 3 pretzel paragraphs, we got to kind of speak about all of this kind of stuff. Now, I'll show you how to plan an essay in a second. For now, we're going over timings and mark schemes. This is what you're marked upon for this particular question. Now, when it comes to the 8-mark question, guys, things change a little bit. For the 8-mark question, you are only marked on the following, guys. You are only marked on AO2. You are not marked on anything else. It is just an 8-mark question. And what are you marked upon firstly? For this question, over here, for the 24 marker, we get 1 poem. For the 8 marker, we get 2 poems. And we have to compare them. And that is the first thing you're marked upon. You're marked upon the quality of your comparison. Have you actually compared both poems, or have you just written about one of them? And then the second thing you're marked upon, guys, is if you're able to compare the methods that the writers use. Now, what are methods, guys? AO2, methods again are language, methods are form, and methods is structure. So essentially, guys, we have to compare our 2 unseen poems for language, structure, and form. That is what you are marked on inside of this exam. And that is how the split is made, guys. So let's recap very, very quickly. 45 minutes, 5 minutes planning, 30 minutes on this question, which is 1 unseen poem. And for this 1 unseen poem, you must write 3 pretzel paragraphs. 10 minutes for the 8 marker, where you are doing 1 big paragraph. For this question, guys, you are marked on AO1 and you are marked on AO2. AO1 is your point and your quote. AO2 is how well you can speak about the effect of language, of structure, and of form. When it comes to structure, it's talking about this stuff. When it comes to form, it's talking about this stuff. Then for this particular question, you are marked only on AO2. And what does AO2 look at in this question? It looks at the quality of your comparison and how well you're able to compare. For example, how in this unseen poem, the writer uses a simile, and how in this unseen poem, the writer uses a metaphor to create a particular meaning. That is the split of your exam. Now, let's go over questions and how we actually plan and build responses for the unseen poetry element of our exam. Let's look and plan a response for this unseen poetry 24-mark question. It reads as follows. How does the poet present ideas about living a happy and contented life? So, we are looking, in your exam, guys, you are looking to plan your paragraphs straight onto the sheet. We're not going to be doing grids, guys. We're planning our paragraphs straight onto the sheet. Now, the paragraphs that we are looking to plan is P, R, T, E, Z, E, and L. And we must plan 3 of these. So we're looking at how the poet presents ideas of living a happy and contented life. He didn't care about money, houses, bank accounts, and lies. This is going to be as follows. This will count as my reference. The technique that I'm going to be speaking about here is the technique of listing. And when I zoom in, guys, I am going to zoom in and talk about how this quote is also juxtaposition. How is this quote juxtaposition? Because it contrasts the majority of people. The majority of people do care about houses. The majority of people do care about money, and so on. And what is my point here, guys? How does this quote present the idea of happiness and living a good life? I would argue it says, don't follow the crowd. And that is my point. And there we have one paragraph planned. Remember guys, we don't plan our effects or our links. Then we plan our second paragraph, like 1,000 diamonds. For this quote guys, when it comes to my technique, I'm going to talk about the use of enjambment. That will be my technique. And the form of this poem guys, I'm going to talk about how this poem is a narrative poem. That is what I will be zooming into. These lines is my reference. And what is my point here guys, is to live a happy and to live a contented life. Focus on building real relationships. That will be my point for this particular paragraph. So I've now planned 2 paragraphs ready to go in my exam. I've got language, I've got structure, I've got form. Now I will plan my last and final paragraph. His heart was fat with the sun. When it comes to this quote guys, my technique that I will use will be symbolism of what the heart symbolizes, and I will zoom in to the noun sun. And my point here guys is that to have a good, happy and contented life, don't judge people by what you see. Focus more on the inside rather than on the outside. And there you have another paragraph planned for your exam. Now guys, the way I've planned is exactly how I want you to plan on the day of your exam. I would like you all to plan live on your exam sheet, because we haven't got time to be doing tables and charts. We have now chosen 3 pretzel paragraphs. These 3 paragraphs have a variety of language structure and form. We never plan effect because we already know the effect of what we're going to pick. Did I read the whole poem? No. Do I want you to read the whole poem in your exam? Not necessarily, no. Because for the unseen poetry, you don't have to understand the whole poem. What you do first is what I did. The first thing I did, guys, was I read the question. Because the question basically tells me what the poem is about. The poem is about how to live a happy and contented life. Now what I did was, after reading that, I then scanned the poem and I looked at, okay, if this is the question, what are 3 quotes that I can use that talk about how to live a happy and contented life? I found 1, 2, 3. First one, guys, my point was, don't judge people. This is shown through the symbolism and the noun heart and sun. Then the list over here and the juxtaposition shows how we shouldn't follow the crowd. And my last point was the idea of how we should focus on building relationships. Now I'm looking at enjambment. What does the enjambment imply? I'm going to say the idea that they cried so much, their tears were never stopping. Just the way the line carries on and carries on and carries on, their tears carried on and carried on and carried on. And then I'm going to speak about the idea that ultimately this is a narrative poem because it ends on the point of telling his actual life story. His life story was about this, about making impact, about leaving an effect. And it tells the story of this remarkable man's life. And that is how you work in your exam, guys. And then you simply write out 3 pretzel paragraphs as you have already done in English Literature Paper 1. Nothing has changed. Same drill. And that is how you approach the Unseen Poetry 24 marker in your exam. Now let's move on to the 8 marker. Guys, when it comes to the 8 mark question in our exam, we are looking to write 1 paragraph. And this paragraph follows the following structure. We give 1 point that addresses both poems. And then we move on to the first poem. So in this case, it would be The Richest Poor Man in the Valley. And for that poem, we find a reference, a technique, an effect that supports our point. Then we move on to the second poem. And then we do the same thing for that poem. Then we come back to the first poem and we zoom in. And then we go to the second poem and we zoom in. We essentially bounce back and forth. Because I always say, guys, that a good comparison is when you go back and forth between the text. back and forth between the poems. And we are looking to write one complete paragraph. Now you may be wondering, sir, is one paragraph enough? Number one, yes it is. Number two, one paragraph like this is definitely enough because we are only working to get 8 marks. And number three, guys, you must be realistic. This is the end of a very long exam. In this exam, you've already done the modern text. You've just done the scene poetry, which is power, conflict, and love. And you've done the 24 marker unseen poetry question. Now you're doing the 8 marker. It's a very long exam. One paragraph is all we're aiming for. Now, just to prove to you guys how one paragraph is enough, here is an example, guys, of a model answer. This answer, as you can see, guys, AQA awarded this answer 7 marks out of 8, which is a top band answer. And what did this kid write, guys? Both Bold and Collins present the strong feelings about seasons. However, Bold presents autumn to be conflicting, where Collins presents spring as being beautiful and liberating. This is the point. Collins uses a semantic feel of freedom and nature, breeze, candies, peonies, and sunlight. This is the reference. Semantic feel is their technique, suggesting that spring allows the release of nature and happiness. That is their effect. Bold uses semantic feel of chaos and destruction. Again, guys, that is their technique. Guys, that is their technique for the other poem. That is their reference for the other poem to suggest that autumn causes turmoil and confusion. And that is the effect of the other poem. Then they zoom in back to Bold. Bold uses one long stanza with loss of enjoyment. Then they zoomed in to show the lack of control and order caused by autumn. That is the effect of the first poem. Whereas Collins uses regular stanzas with enjoyment. That was their zooming in to show the freedom and liberation that spring allows. And that was their effect. They have pretty much, guys, used the structure that I'm proposing we use over here. They gave 1 point for both poems, and then literally, guys, they bounced back and forth, and they achieved 7 out of 8. Now look at their effect. Their effect isn't in a lot of detail. It's not as though they've written massive amounts for their effect. But again, you must be realistic. This is an 8-mark question at the end of a very long exam. AQA is not expecting a massive 3-page answer. They understand what exam they've set. So all you're aiming for is one quality paragraph. And if you have time and if you want to do more, you can do more. But the target is one quality paragraph, just like the one on the board behind me. Now, guys, here is the unseen poetry question for the exam that we've just been looking at. So this was the 24 marker that we planned, and here is the 8 marker that is attached to it. It says, in both Nobody and The Richest Poor Man in the Valley, which is the poem we just read, both poets describe ideas about how to live your life. What are the similarities and or differences between the methods the poets use to present these ideas? So let's first find what this poem says about living your life. Find some reason to take you out of yourself. Find some reason to take you out of yourself. This is going to be my reference, and this is going to be the technique of enjambment, because the line continues on to the next line. And I am going to pick the technique of the position. That is the technique that I will be zooming into. And what is my point here, guys? My point here is that we must find a purpose. We must look for a purpose in what we do, in what we live. We must find a reason. That is that paragraph planned. And I'm gonna use this paragraph over here, guys. I'm gonna use this paragraph over here to compare it to. And I'm gonna talk about what? Is it similar or is it different? My point is going to be how I am looking at similarities. Why? Because both poems look at how in life we should have a purpose. In this one, we shouldn't live for other people. We shouldn't live for the crowd. Rather, we should live for ourselves. And in this one, the writer is talking about how, yes, we do need a purpose and we must find this purpose. So both poems are similar. And yes, before you ask guys, you can use one of these quotes again, as long as we can make it fit this particular question. My point is going to be that both poems are similar because they encourage us to find a purpose. And lies, here the writer has used a list. The effect, I will do that when I'm writing, I will not do that when I plan. Then guys, for the second poem, of yourself, my technique here I said was a list. Effect we will do later. Then we go back to the first poem and I'm gonna zoom in to the juxtaposition, and the effect again I will do later. And then I go to the second poem and I also zoom into juxtaposition, which is good as I'm comparing the methods, and the effect I will do later. Now guys, what you can see in the board is a visual of how the paragraph will look. But in my exam, I personally wouldn't do this as it'll waste time. What I've done here is enough. Visually, I know I'm comparing that to that paragraph over there. And all I will do is then I will write my paragraph. But if it helps you to do this, then please feel free to do this in your exam. And guys, that is how you plan for the 8 marker for the unseen poetry question. And then all you would do guys is you would produce this paragraph in your exam. And every time you bounce between the poems, you might say furthermore, in additions, you might use connective just to make the essay seem seamless. But one paragraph is what you are aiming for. Let's not lose track here. Which one is more important? Of course, the 24 marker, but I want you to aim to do both. I want you guys to aim to do both. Do not be put off by unseen poetry, guys. Do not be put off by unseen poetry. Unseen poetry is not hard. You don't have to understand the entire poem. You don't need to be a genius at poetry to do the question. We are still doing English. You are still analyzing quotes. It's the same skill that we did for Macbeth, Romeo, Christmas Carol, Jekyll and Hyde, Christmas Carol. Nothing has changed. If anything, it's easier because context has now been removed. So guys, don't be put off. Try to include language devices, structural devices, form, do all that good stuff. Try to include it throughout your entire essay. And if you want to practice before your exams, what I would do is this, guys, go online, Google AQA, English, literature, past papers, or whatever your exam board is, open up the unseen poetry questions and literally do what I just did. Spend 5 minutes planning both questions. And once you've planned both questions, then write out paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and paragraph 3 for the first 24 marker in 30 minutes. And then write out the 8 marker comparison in 10 minutes and see how you get on and see your strengths and see your weaknesses. All right, guys, I hope you found that video beneficial. I hope you now know what unseen poetry looks like in your exam. As always, guys, it's been Mr. Everything English. Peace.